From a people perspective, it's the things we take for granted, like healthcare, pensions, workers' comp, those things in the US have really never existed in the Colombian coffee industry. And I think many industries, coffee globally. We made it a prime focus of ours, both from a doing things right perspective, but also how do we drive more value for the business to make sure that all of our employees have pension, all of our employees have workers' compensation, all of them have health benefits, all of them have bank accounts, things that people have never really done in the industry.
That was Adam Jason. He's a partner in the Legacy Group. And Adam's got a really unique story. And it's a little bit of a twist on the show because we're talking about investing in potentially coffee producing farms in Latin America, in Colombia to be specific. But I think it's a great episode because Adam gets into how in just a short 5 years, they've taken a fragmented market, moved into Colombia and become the number one producer of coffee out of Colombia, which in my mind, that's where coffee comes from and seems like a staggering statistic, and also improved lives along the way. So very different investment opportunity. I definitely think you'll enjoy the show, so stay tuned. The limited partner shares in the potentially outsized returns of a well-planned and executed investment, but as a passive investor, and has the maximum leverage on their most precious asset, their time. And that is why we're here together. 90% of the millionaires out there built their net worth with real estate. However, 0% of the billionaires are hands-on managing the real estate assets because there simply isn't enough time. My name is Jake Wiley, and for the past 16 years, I've been investing in real estate, and I've learned a thing or two. But the most important lesson is how to leverage the expertise and time of others to maximize your investment potential. Welcome to the Limited Partner Podcast. All right, welcome partners. We're back again for another episode, and I think this one is going to prove out to be very interesting. I'm joined by Adam Jason, and Adam has got a really interesting background. He's coming from us from the legal background, but has invested in land in Latin America and kind of startups and impact investing. So it's going to be a different show, and I think it's going to be really informative and open your eyes to some other potential investment opportunities out there. And Adam, I know I didn't do you justice in my brief intro there, but I'd love to turn it over to you for my listeners. If you give us a little bit of background on, how you started as an attorney and ended up in Colombia.
Sure. So as you mentioned, talking to you from Colombia today, I've been in Medellin, Colombia for the last 5 years now. Moved down here full-time January 2018. Interesting background, I hope, for your listeners. I graduated from law school back in 2010, worked at two of the largest law firms in the US for about 8 years before coming down to Colombia. My legal background is really focused on SEC, capital markets, corporate finance, taking companies public through IPOs, raising money, both public and private equity and debt, advising boards of directors, etc. Did that for a while. So primarily Fortune 500 companies out of the Midwest, the Sherwin-Williams of the world, Macy's, and also down in Texas in the oil and gas space. Basically, the trajectory change for me came as I was moving towards the position in my career where if you're in the legal world, you basically decide, do you become a partner at the law firm? Do you go in-house at a client and work? Or do you do something a little bit different and entrepreneurial? Obviously, based on the conversation we're having today, it chose the latter of the three. But the connection to Colombia, I had a month break between a job I had taken in Houston and the job I was currently working at in Dallas. Really kind of a traditional background personally, basically college, post-grad, go into the corporate America and work. So I hadn't really done much traveling at all, especially on an international basis. And I wanted to use that month to really get the experience of not only traveling and going to tourism destinations, et cetera, but trying to actually live on a day-to-day basis in a different culture, a different country, different language, et cetera. So I'd heard good things about Colombia. I was learning Spanish at the time, decided to spend that month that I had down here in Medellin, which is in the center of the country, kind of the mountain area for anybody who doesn't know. But what I found when I got down here was a lot of foreign capital coming into the country, lots of opportunity in real estate, particularly from an investment standpoint. lots of attention on the market from a tourism perspective. Even just this past year, we've seen a 62% increase in tourism coming down here with that capital and more eyes on the market. Really was intrigued by what I saw here. I also had the opportunity to meet my now business partner at Legacy Group, which is our investment firm. And at the time, he was just founding and kicking off the initial capital raise for the Green Coffee Company, which is our flagship portfolio company down here. We can talk about the details of the business, but basically I agreed to help him while I was back in the US doing the work for the initial capital raise. My background, as an attorney in the corporate finance space, if you're working with US investors, even if it's a Colombian business, all the same rules, regulations apply from an SEC perspective, et cetera. So with our target audience really being US high net worth, accredited investors looking for opportunities in Latin America, my background was directly relevant. So I helped him with the initial capital raise, loved what I was seeing. And also, as I mentioned, was kind of at that crossroads in my professional life of deciding what to do. And so I decided to make the leap full time and come down here to Colombia. Sold everything I had, slept on an air mattress for 2 weeks. In January 2018, I came down here full time and have been here ever since. And now married to a Colombian, speaking Spanish. I don't know. Life has its interesting twists and turns.
That it does. And I mean, I'm going to probably ask the question that most of my listeners probably have too, is that when you think of, in kind of traveling or being in South America, like Colombia seems to be a higher risk place. Is that like a myth, or is that like yesterday's news, or like, what are your thoughts on that? Or explain that to us.
Yeah, I'd say a myth and yesterday's news.
Okay.
From a safety perspective, I feel safer down here than when I lived in Houston. No offense to the Houston people that are watching. But yeah, it's definitely a myth. You can see like the rise in tourism is one example of that. More and more people are coming here, having a great experience, going back and telling people about it. Every time our investors come here, or a group of our investors come here, there's at least one in the group that says, I'm not leaving, I'm staying. People like the female population here is attractive to people, but everybody always finds a reason to really love and enjoy the place, whether it's the restaurants, the tourism that's available. I couldn't be happier being down here. And really, if it sucked, I wouldn't be here. So just being here, I guess, is the evidence of that.
Yeah, I didn't know if maybe you were just like super tough, but it's really great to hear that, Colombia, because it was not on my radar, right? Like we tried to go do a trip last year and we are going to go to Ecuador, and then they had all this civil unrest and, like that didn't work out, but like Colombia wasn't on the agenda, but maybe it is now.
Nice.
Well, let's get into it. Now, I kind of want to unpack this in layers if we can, but it might all be so intertwined that like it just becomes part of the conversation. But land is not something that like, we would typically look at from kind of an LP, or at least my LP base is we're thinking about cash flow, right? And, just sitting on land is typically not a cash flow asset, but I want to give you the opportunity to kind of share the opportunity of land and what you're seeing. And then, obviously transition into Latin America and some other things you're doing.
Sure. So maybe for some context, as I mentioned, 2017, we started the Green Coffee Company down here in Colombia. And it was really founded as a kind of a client demand. We had a group of high net worth investors from the US, primarily invested in commercial real estate here, already comfortable with Colombia, but they wanted an alternative to commercial real estate, which functioned in a similar manner. How? Collateralized asset, cash flowing asset, asset heavy, but it's also productive because it has an agricultural product like coffee coming off of the land. So since 2017, we have become the largest producer of coffee in Colombia. We got about 9,000 acres, 11.5 million trees, incredible technology and infrastructure. So the value of land, I agree with you. If you're just sitting on it and land banking, that's not I think a great, at least for me, a great strategy. I'm sure there's some people who have won big doing that. But, what we like is really farmland, and we like it for its stability. Farmland is not going to have the ups and downs of stocks on the New York Stock Exchange. It also is a good inflation hedge. Basically whenever you're seeing inflation, you're also seeing a rise in commodity prices. So the commodity or the product coming off the farms is used to hedge the price of, or to battle that inflation, basically 1 to 1. I think over the last 3 years, you have a 97 out of 100 correlation between the rise in farmland prices and the consumer price index. So it's pretty closely tied, and it actually beats inflation over the last, I'd say 20 years from the data we've seen. So it's a nice investment from a cash flow perspective, potential to rise in value, stability. It's a productive asset. Most people will look to like gold and other things like that. Of course, the rise of cryptocurrencies over the last few years and tend to, or potentially don't have access to the opportunity to invest in farmland. But, the fact that there's an asset there and a product that it's kicking off creates a pretty interesting opportunity from an investment standpoint. We've taken all that land and basically rolled it up into an enterprise, a real business, a business that we could sell to Starbucks, Nespresso, do a US IPO for, gone through vertical integration, which means we'll go beyond the commodity point of selling coffee and then actually make consumer products and sell direct to consumers and retailers. So we're always trying to add more value, but fundamentally the downside protection, I guess, for investors is you have land that we're buying at good prices that has a commodity coming off of it, provides pretty good stability.
And I guess maybe even digging in there a little bit too, because there's really two things that are happening. There's the land, which is a producing asset in of itself. And then there's the business, right? Like taking the green coffee company. Now, is the business strategy, one or the other or both? And like, how does that work? Because like you could obviously go buy the land and then say, okay, I'm going to lease it to a farmer, right? Like that's a farmland strategy. But are you looking at it and saying, no, we want land it's a producing, but we're going to run the business as well? Or how do you look at that?
We want it to become the largest producer in the country, not only for the scale that comes with that, but also the having our own certainty around our production. If you're just running infrastructure like co-op, for example, you're dependent on farmers to deliver. But our strategy, I think we basically have 3 pillars to our business. We buy a lot of farms, we manage the farms, we produce the coffee, we run it through our technology and sell it as green coffee, which is essentially the pre-roasted coffee. It's called green coffee because it has a slight tint to it. That's the commodity coffee that gets sold on exchanges. We then have the vertical integration of our coffee, which is the roasted coffee. So what does that mean? We go one step further in the production process. We roast it, which means essentially cooking the coffee and giving it that brownish tint that we're all used to. You can ground it or sell it whole bean, but that is selling at a higher price point, higher margin, further down the value chain to retailers, distributors, direct to clients in the US who are looking either to sell the branded coffee that we create or do some white labeling for products that they have. The third pillar of the business is, I think this is something that is truly unique and special and the first of its kind in the coffee industry. And I'll give you a little bit of the history and kind of the science behind this. Whenever you grow coffee, it grows in a cherry form. Looks like the cherries that we're used to as the fruit. You have the seed inside, and then that composes about 50%. And the balance is skin, mucilage, pulp, sugars, etc. For the history of coffee in Colombia and elsewhere, all of that excess, the non-seed, the non-coffee, has been essentially discarded, used as thrown in rivers, becomes a pollutant. What we said is, there's so many raw materials there, great sugar content, great proteins. What can we do with this to create new products, eliminate waste, but also turn what's essentially garbage into an additional revenue stream for the business? What we decided to do is pursue the creation of ethanol. You can create ethanol by fermenting the sugars in those cherries. We're building a distillery right now that has the capacity to create 12,000 liters of pure ethanol a day that will be used as vodkas, gins, spirits, sold as food grade ethanol, and also sold as ethanol for gasoline and energy creation. So all those different pillars we're looking to explore. So it really is, you got the fundamentals of you have farms, they make coffee, but now it's how do we make every cherry, every coffee bean that we take off the trees worth as much as possible for our investors.
And I don't want this to feel like it's a throwaway comment. I actually want to dig in a little bit more. Again, this might be a little bit tangential, but when you grow up and you think about Colombian coffee, it's like, well, that's where coffee comes from, right? And you're saying that you're the largest producer of coffee in Colombia. That's a pretty big deal, isn't
Thank you. Yes, we take great pride in it. What we see in the market, honestly, is I'll tell you what creates the opportunity is really the lack of competition and the lack of investment in the industry for really a period of, I'd say, about 40 years. So what you find in the market is 95% of all the farmers here own less than 3 acres of land. Our strategy has always been, and that's the norm. The exception is you have a large family that's been in the industry for generations. They've consolidated, call it 200 acres, and you eventually run into generational turnover where somebody in the family who's inheriting the land doesn't want to be a farmer, but all of the family's net worth is tied up in the coffee land. But they want to live in Miami or study in Paris or what have you, but they can't get any liquidity around that property. So we've become kind of a buyer of choice for large acquisitions in the country. And our goal is to consolidate that land and use our centralized infrastructure to process that coffee. The names that we know, like the Starbucks of the world, Nestle, they're not interested in farming directly. They're happy to buy coffee after it's already been produced and everybody's done done, I guess, the heavy work at origin. But even that, they have seen really challenges from a supply chain perspective of actually getting coffee and farmers delivering. A lot of times prices will go up and farmers will sit on their coffee to wait for the prices to go even higher and speculate some. That creates constraints for the supply chain and drives up prices and maybe limits the coffee they can get to. So we're willing to have those conversations with families, do the dirty work on the ground to consolidate farms. And we actually have capital behind us to do that. I think, really our advantage has been fresh eyes, looking at the industry from a capitalistic American point of view, and also having the capital to be able to make some real moves down here.
Well, I'm sure, like green, the sustainability and impact form. Like I even know about that in the coffee industry because it's a big deal, and pushing it all the way down to the farms. And then, you're in a market where you mentioned that the average is like 3 acres. So you got a lot of families and people out there just kind of slugging along and probably beholden to some of these large corporations. You're taking that and you're aggregating farms. And I don't know if you're going all the way down to the 3 acre level, but what is the impact for the people in Colombia that were, legacy farmers or that you're consolidating with?
Sure. I think it was a broad range of impacts. One, where the families we're buying have a chance at liquidity that they probably never would get. Who's gonna buy the farms? That one is less important to me than the environmental impact. Just what we're doing with the coffee cherries, as I explained a few minutes ago. We're going to have this coming year about 200 million pounds of this coffee cherry waste. So if we can use that in a productive manner, that's 200 million pounds that's not going into, becoming a pollutant essentially for the industry. From a people perspective, this, I think, ties along with some of the comments you've made about perception of Colombia. And this one's actually true. It's the things we take for granted, like healthcare, pensions, workers' comp, those things in the US have really never existed in the Colombian coffee industry. And I think many industries, coffee globally, we made it a prime focus of ours, both from a doing things right perspective, but also how do we drive more value for the business to make sure that all of our employees have pension, all of our employees have workers' compensation, all of them have health benefits, all of them have bank accounts, things that people have never really done in the industry. We started the business in a town here called Salgar. That's the first place that we bought farms. We've become the largest employer there by far. We have about 450 full-time employees. During the harvest period, when we get more of the pickers for the coffee, everything still has to be done by hand here because of the terrain and topography. We're over 1,000 employees during that time. There's also initiatives that we do that I think we're particularly proud of. This year on our farms, we will grow and plant an additional 2.5 million coffee trees. So we have a huge greenhouse operation. There's a program here in Colombia designed to find employment for single mothers, heads of family. We're affiliated with that group, and we already have 26 single mothers working in our farms, and they run entirely the greenhouse operation for the business. So the growth of those 2.5 million trees is in their hands. We wanted to give them actual meaningful jobs, not just kind of put them wherever. And they're an integral part of our business, and we're affecting the community in that way. Becoming the largest employer in the town, you're seeing kids now with school uniforms. You're seeing roads and infrastructure get built. We have the ability to have a huge impact in the communities that we're working in. And that's something we're truly proud of.
Okay. I mean, I think it's amazing. And I think the final question that maybe will tie this all together, it's not the final question of the show, but kind of my chain here is that, to enter an industry and then to add all of these things, right? So healthcare is not free, pensions are not free, working with the community and all the things that you're sponsoring, you're having to pay for it. How are you guys doing that in a profitable way in kind of in this market that obviously already existed?
Yeah, it's really not a material impact to our cost of production. We can increase costs one place and decrease them in another. So one thing that the small farmers get killed on is the cost of fertilizer. And if they're buying it, trying to import it directly or buying it from intermediaries, we buy so much that we get better pricing. So we save money there. And I also think whatever increased cost we have, let's call it 20% more than you'd pay for a typical employee, it's something that we will be, as a company and our investors, will be rewarded for on the back end. Companies because we think about how do we sell the business in the future? What does an exit look like? Can we get to an IPO? Who's going to be customers for our coffee? The regulatory environment, consumer sentiment are all pushing further and further towards an ESG or environmentally focused mindset, right? There's regulations in the European Union that may literally force European companies like Nestle to only work with supply chain providers that are fulfilling a lot of these new requirements, whether it comes to employees, environments, etc. So by differentiating ourselves in that way and operating at a large scale, I think we put ourselves in a unique position for selling coffee, but also potentially being acquired so that these companies that historically have never bought farms and had to depend on others for supply now can't depend on that. There's no traceability in coffee. All of this coffee from these small farmers gets put together in cooperatives or with a large exporter. They don't know where they're getting, who they're buying it from, even if it's Colombian coffee or if it got brought in from Ecuador and people were told that it's Colombian coffee. So it's going to be hard for them. And I think we become a great partner. I know too, if you look at companies that have been looking at public markets in the US recently, they have to be telling the right story or they're going to get punished by it. If they tell the wrong story or if they're not living up to the story they tell, they get hammered. So it's important for us from a capitalistic standpoint, as well as building a business that we're proud of, to make sure we're doing all these things, even if there's an incremental cost to doing so. We also get the best employees because now they know we're a differentiator when it comes to employment.
And I'm really glad you actually brought up that ESG point. And for my listeners out there, if I actually recorded a show that was just about ESG and some of the trends, and Adam's absolutely right, is that in the relatively near future, call it 5 to 10 years, those that have adopted an ESG strategy now are going to be the winners, right? And then those that haven't, they may not be buyers, especially if you're accumulating assets in a sense where really institutional money is looking for it. But it is not going to be a long road before institutional money will not touch anything, any assets that don't have a verifiable ESG strategy. So Adam, I really, one, I appreciate you bringing that up there. And then two, if it's finally registering with you guys out there, like go back and listen to my podcast that really talks about the ESG strategy, because I go a little bit deeper on that. So I think that's really cool. But Adam, I think what I'd like to do is try and summarize what I've heard as the strategy, and you can keep me honest here, but you've found an opportunity for like a true commodity. Everybody knows coffee, right? Coffee is demanded all over the world. You found a market that's essentially, even though it's like one of the oldest markets out there for coffee, it's still immature and it's super disaggregated. And you found an opportunity to invest and bring efficiencies and capital into that market in really a short period of time. So you're talking less than 5 years. You're now the largest producer of coffee coming out of Colombia, which is, just kind of amazing if you really sit there and think about like, where does coffee come from? And then you've got land, right, which is farmland, which is a producing asset because it's producing coffee. So there's, basically security there. And then you layer on a business. And when you start aggregating and combining farms, you create a bunch of efficiencies. And therefore, then you've created a better, more efficient environment that's got a better cost structure. You're bringing in better employees because you're providing benefit and all of these things that they've never had before. And you're still super competitive on the market and continuing to grow. Is that a fair kind of summarization?
You did a great job.
Awesome.
Appreciate the summary. Hey, I was going to say, I credit our early investors for pushing us into the market. And then it became, there's no way I can sit here and tell you that we predicted everything we could see. Like you said, the market's dislocated. It really required a deep look under the hood to understand what the full potential of the opportunity was. We started to see, how do we get to number one in Colombia? And now we're thinking about, how do we become the largest producer of Arabica coffee globally? And I think it'll take about doubling our size, but we're trying to do it in the next 2 years. We've had wonderful support from our LPs/investors to date. We have about 430 investors. We've brought $60 million into the country. About 95% of those folks are high net worth accredited investors out of the US. So we're appreciative of the belief in what we're doing. And really, I think it took, to your point, something like Colombian coffee to attract that kind of interest. If we were doing Colombian bananas, nobody would know it. But Colombia and coffee are so synonymous in people's minds. As you mentioned, coffee is the second most heavily traded commodity globally, behind petroleum. So it's an opportunity that was big enough to, I think, justify for a lot of investors making a leap from maybe what they're more comfortable with, which a lot of times is, US-based real estate or assets, to go internationally.
Yeah. And I think really just kind of tying a bow on what you said is thinking about the regulatory environment, right? Like if I had a reservation now, I would say, one, I like it because it's backed by real estate, right? Like behind everything is essentially the farm, and that's what you're buying, right? And then you've got an efficient operation that you're layering on top, which the ability to grow that, is really not a one-for-one incremental cost for you, right? Like you can scale pretty easily because you've already got the infrastructure. So then really the big open question on my side would be, okay, what is the regulatory environment? Like what is your risk from that perspective?
In Colombia.
Yeah, in Colombia.
We don't talk too much about regulatory risk because it's, the industry's been here forever. The country's very supportive of foreign direct investment. More of the risk comes down to, okay, what's going on in commodity markets? We want to get further down the value chain as fast as possible to get away from some of the fluctuations that you see on commodity markets. Roasted coffee, you have a contract with Walmart, the price doesn't change every day. If you're trading on an exchange, you can run into price differentials. We have a very employee heavy workforce, technology. As I mentioned, the way coffee grows, it's really on the sides of mountains. You'll have one ripe bean right next to unripe bean. So it requires still a lot of human labor to make that differentiation, climb the mountain, pick the coffee. We talk about more, I'd say, operational risk factors than anything from a regulatory perspective. And the country wants to see a push towards agriculture to reduce inflation, become more of a producer than an importer, wants to see these sustainability initiatives going forward, wants to encourage employment, all the same kind of government initiatives that we're used to elsewhere.
Well, I mean, that's super helpful, right? Because like I said, again, maybe at the top of the show, the myth that, Colombia is dangerous and, is probably better known for cocaine than coffee, right? It's probably not necessarily true. And then the government is supportive and people have been, there's been foreign direct investment for years.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And growing. I mean, last year was the highest. Last year, I think $9.2 billion came into the country in foreign direct investment. The year before was $4.3 billion. So it's really growing tremendously. There's a big startup community growing here. Technology is becoming more and more popular. There's a huge young population. So you're seeing a lot of that kind of startup and attraction for people. And then there's opportunities in historical industries and a growing population. So there's opportunity here. We're seeing all the multinationals make big plays here. Pepsi just built its largest facility in South America, right down the street from where I am. And we're seeing a lot of money come in. So it's an exciting time, and love kind of telling the story because we want to get more and more people excited about the country and the opportunity here and, obviously what we're doing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a super exciting story. I think that the statistics are staggering, right? One, that what you've been able to accomplish in a short period of time. Two, on a commodity, like you mentioned, is the number 2 traded commodity globally, right? That's pretty cool, right? And I think that, the fact that it's also backed by real estate, right, really ties it in well. So for those of you that are out there listening, the reason I wanted to bring Adam on is that it's a different story and it's a different opportunity. And I think that, time dating this episode, we're in May of 2023 when we recorded it. The U.S. commercial real estate market is in a state of turmoil and we don't know where it's going. And, you've got people predicting doom and gloom. You got people predicting, nothing but rainbows and sunshine. And I don't think it's either one of those, right? So we'll have to see. But, the one thing that's for certain is that there will not be a morning that I wake up that I don't have coffee.
Nice. Same here.
Well, Adam, I like to wrap up every episode with a bit of gratitude. And the concept is that, none of us got to where we are today without somebody, giving us a look that we probably didn't deserve and an opportunity. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to publicly thank or give somebody a shout out that gave you a little bit of a break.
No, I couldn't be here without the love, support of my mom, my great wife. I have an outstanding brother and uncle and aunt who I grew up with. So the family that's been around me has definitely helped me, I'd say, become a person that I'm proud to be. So that's more important than any of the business boosts that have come along the way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And just, kind of thinking through this is that it's, to find yourself in Colombia, taking that kind of pivotal change in your career, you definitely would have had to have a lot of support and people saying, I believe in you. So that's pretty cool.
That's right. Absolutely.
Well, Adam, this has been a really fascinating show. I really enjoyed it. I love the ESG. I love the impact. I love the real estate tie-in. I love the alternative and I love coffee. So thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you, Jake.
I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and I'd actually love for you to contribute to a future episode. If you have a question you'd like answered or a topic or a guest to bring on the show, please email me at jake@thelimitedpartner.com. Now I realize there's a lot of lingo that's thrown around on these shows, so I've created a cheat sheet for you with the top 26 terms that come up most often. Head on over to thelimitedpartner.com/lingo for the list. Enjoy, and we'll see you next time.